Today's woodworker is the lucky recipient of an awful lot of power tools that do an awful lot of the work that hand tools used to do quickly, efficiently, and, well, with a lot less muscle power. But there are still some other hand tools out there that should continue to be used, and today's topic is hand planes, and they definitely belong in the shop. Hand planes remove excess material and shape wood without creating a great deal of noise or dust. And for many woodworkers, that's a good enough reason to use them. There are literally hundreds, if not thousands, of different plane types and bodies. They range in size from about 3 or 4 feet long down to about 6 inches long. They all serve a purpose, and you can collect all of them if you want. It's going to take up a lot of your shop, and it's going to take up a lot of your wallet. But for general everyday use in a woodworking shop, I've got 4 planes that I recommend every shop have. And honestly, you could actually do away with 1 or 2 of them if you wanted to, but it's still nice to have. So let's take a look at those 4 planes that I recommend you have in your shop. The first plane we want to talk about is a block plane, and this is a very common plane. You'll actually find these in an awful lot of places, not just in woodworking shops. It's a detail tool. It's for taking fine cuts. You could use it to straighten a board, and I guess that's a possibility, but basically because of its size, the sole is designed to, well, work on smaller pieces. If you're flattening a board, you want a much longer sole, and we'll get to that later. But this is for working on little detail pieces. Block plane can be used for chamfering edges on a piece, making it a little softer, actually giving it a little bit of figure to it. When you're fitting boards together, if you have a high spot in one place, you can take down that high spot a little bit so that the boards will fit tight together. And again, a fine detail tool, softening the edges of a drawer front. And you can see, you can actually use it on the long grain as well, with a little bit of an angled approach, and then coming down against the wood. Super handy for all sorts of tiny little detail jobs. And this is an opportunity to talk about some of the parts of a plane that are actually common for almost all planes. The first part is the sole. This is what actually rides on the wood. We want to keep it nice and clean, rust-free, and actually flat. If you happen to ding it up with something, you want to take some time and flatten it with some sandpaper or with a sharpening stone that's already flat, so you know that it's flat, to keep this nice and even all the way across the length. Now, it's got a section in the middle where the plane blade sticks out, and that's actually called the mouth of the plane. And that is where the wood hits the steel or the rubber hits the road, depending on your analogy that you want to use. The blade sticks through that just a little bit, and I mean just a little bit. If you drag your finger over it, you should just feel it catch, and that's what you want to look for, and you can adjust that as you go. Now, this particular plane has an adjustable mouth, and that's actually a real cool thing too. And some planes do and some planes don't. See how that opens and closes? That's done with this knob at the top. You loosen it up, and it basically slides front to back. Why that? Why is that done? Well, when you're working with heavier cuts in the wood, you want to have a larger chip that's coming out, and that's going to leave space for it to come through. In general, though, you want to have this fairly close to the blade, because what that does is helps bend the chip and tear it and make it a curl so that it comes out easier and not in a long stream so that you can handle it, okay? So a little bit tighter to the blade is always a good thing. All right, so that's basically the sole. So this is the top of the plane and the body of the plane, and what we want to do is, well, I'm going to take this apart and show you some of the different parts, okay? Now there is a screw here, and you could loosen that up to take things apart, but you don't actually have to. See this knob here? All you have to do is loosen it, and it takes the pressure off against the plane blade. A little bit more, and we lift this across the screw, and this is the cap, and it's free. And there's the knob from underneath that presses down against the blade to lock it into place, okay? That we don't need for the moment. I want to show you what's going on in here. The blade fits in, and as you can see, this lash back here, this handle, adjusts the angle of the blade, and also it adjusts the forward and backward motion of the plane. So if I turn this forward or backward, it moves the blade forward and back, and that extends it through the mouth. And if I can hold this all in one place, and it extends it through the mouth so that it extends more or less. And again, that lash lets you set it up so that the blade extends. Here, let me stick that out a little bit more, so that you can get the blade parallel to the mouth for the best cut. Just like that. Now, putting it back together, slap that guy in. Oh, and by the way, the blade comes out pretty easily too. You've got a bevel on one side, flat on the other, and you want to keep it that way. And again, I'm sure you've heard it before, but a sharp tool is the best tool. So whenever you get the chance, make sure that your plane blade is nice and sharp. The holes here are to allow it to fit in over that screw and to catch on the lash as well. Simple enough. Drop it back in, get it to fit over the lash knob in the right place, and you can see there's a second hole there. As the blade gets worn and you start to sharpen back further, you can use that to extend it to the next space, and so you get an awful lot of life out of this blade. Put the cap over in place, lock it down, get it close. Now I'm going to turn it over. And there, we got it just about right. Just a little bit of finger, don't cut yourself, but just check with a finger. Just a little bit of extension, and we're good to go. Yeah, that'll work. The mouth is set right, and that is a block plane. I'm only going to touch on some of the uses that you're going to find for this plane. There are so many that it's going to be handy to have on your bench all the time and within hand's reach. And as a matter of fact, there's even a variation on it that's called an apron plane. That's a little smaller. That does exactly what it's supposed to do. Fits in your apron, it's ready to go, a little less adjustment, but it's always going to be there for those slight trimming needs whenever you need it. The next plane we want to talk about is the jack plane. And it's called the jack plane because, well, because it's the jack of all trades. It does almost everything in the shop. And there are, again, lots and lots of sizes of this particular plane. They range pretty much from 12 to 18 inches. And in different widths as well. You can get them in very narrow sizes and wider sizes. One of the more unique uses of a plane, and this can be a block plane or a jack plane, is taking it to a lumber yard when you've got rough cut material and you're not really sure of the grain underneath. You can simply take a plane and scrape a bit off, and you'll need to adjust a little bit as you go. And you'll be able to clear enough away to be able to get an idea of the grain look, the color, beyond that thick, ugly, rough exterior. A real quick way to look at, and obviously you can tell, the jack plane comes in real handy here because it takes off a little more material. With a block plane, you'd be working a little bit harder on that one. Let's look at some of the details on a jack plane. Now, similar to the block plane, it has a cap that holds the blade in place. In this case, it's called a lever cap because it's got a lever that when you flip it up, releases the cap and releases the blade itself. Now, this case, interestingly enough, the blade is in here and has actually a cap on it. This is the iron cap and then the iron itself. This is actually to keep chatter down when you're making cuts. This iron cap goes right up to the edge of the blade and basically lays right on there, right up against it with just a little bit back from that edge. And this gives extra support to hold the blade rigid when it's going through a cut. This iron cap keeps things stiff and makes sure that it doesn't chatter during the cut. It's a very handy thing to have. It's simple enough to set up. It just screws down with a screw there and you're in good shape. Now that's going to always fit down when you're putting it back in the frog. This piece here is called a frog. I'm sure there's a reason behind that too, but it's a frog, okay? And this is a lateral adjustment, okay? Just like we had with the block plane. When this is all put back together, okay? Let's see if we can show you that. When you move it, it changes the lateral adjustment. Simple enough, right? Put it back together, the lever cap goes on. Have it up enough, you got it in the right place. Come on. I've got the blade sticking out, there we go. We drop in, push the cap lever down, and we're ready to go. This plane doesn't have an adjustable mouth, so its mouth is basically set for the size it's going to use every time. Unlike with the block plane, where we basically hold the plane with our hands at the back, your finger down in front to support it, we've got a little more material here. So we have a front tote and a rear handle, and that's going to be the concept of how you hold that. Adjusting the depth of the blade is again a screw back here on the frog, just like we had with the block plane. Forward and back to move it in and out of the mouth. Now, as I mentioned, jack planes are basically designed for truing up edges, okay? And fitting boards together. So ultimately what you want to really be doing is riding it on an edge and not rocking it, okay? So one of the problems that people will have is when they put it on an edge like this, they start to do this. And we want to avoid that as much as possible, and that's a practice thing. When you're planing, you get used to not rocking. You want to ride straight on that flat. And as you get to the end, you're going to find out that you can lift up. We don't want to do that either. We want to keep it flat, so you adjust the weight to the back to hold it down. Again, it's all practice. You'll get used to it. Start with a piece of poplar. Don't start with mahogany. Work on it. Get used to it. The jack of all trades, it belongs in your shop. And while I have your attention and we're talking about hand planes, let's talk about one of the most controversial discussions about hand planes, and that's how do you store them, okay? When they're sitting on your bench, do you leave them sitting up or do you put them on their side, okay? The question is, will you damage the blade? Now, if it's on a workbench, it's wood, okay? So if you've got it down here and you bump it, well, what's it going to do? It's going to cut up your workbench. That's a possibility. So if you don't want to cut up your workbench, lay it on its side. Is it going to hurt the hand plane? No, because that's what it's designed to do, all right? You're not going to damage it. You may knock it out of alignment, but in general, it's not a terrible thing to have it laying on its sole. The third plane I want to talk about is a shoulder plane. Now, this is it's about the same size as a block plane, actually a little bit smaller. The unique thing about it is the blade comes all the way out to the sides of the sole. And there's actually cutaways at the sole and on the sides of the plane so that that blade can extend right up to the edge. Now, this is obviously a little bit smaller, a little bit thinner. That's for a particular reason. This shoulder plane is designed to get into shoulders, such as in rabbets or tenons or something like that. Most rabbets are made on a table saw or perhaps a router, and it doesn't always mean that that corner gets cleaned up correctly, and that's why the rabbet plane exists, that shoulder plane. You can get in there, you hold it flat against the bottom, tight against the side so that 90 degree comes into play. Give it a little push, give it a little more edge here. And you clean up that corner so that you've got a perfect 90 degree angle. Now, of course, the fun thing is, because you've got the angle on both sides, you can actually run sideways as well and make sure that your plain body is on the side. Cut like that. So, shoulder planes are designed to have a perfect 90 degree angle mating between the sole and the sides, on both sides, so you can use it on both sides. So that's an important thing to look for when you're looking at a shoulder plane. Take an engineer's square along. Make sure that the shoulders, the sides, match up with the sole at a 90 degree angle. That's a great thing to have. Pieces of it, same as the others. We've got a cap screw on top, essentially. Now this one's actually a little funky. There's a couple different versions you're going to see. This one can actually be used in this variation as well to get into even tighter corners or working with grooves. If you've got a groove that happens to be 3/4 or 1 inch wide, they also make smaller, thinner shoulder planes. So again, lots of different planes to match lots of different needs. Again, we've got a locking cap right here that drops on top of the blade, fits into place, and the blade's going to extend just past that piece of the sole. And again, we have forward and rear motion that you adjust to get it to fit just perfect. The cap on here fits in, screws down, and that allows you to have a front surface to ride on as well. Okay? Now, something that's kind of interesting that I want to share with you too, if you don't want a dedicated shoulder plane, there's a cool little thing called a shoulder block plane or a rabbeting block plane. This is actually a block plane that works functionally very well as a block plane, but as you can see, the sides are cut through as well so that you can have the blade extend all the way to the sides, and you get a 2-for-1 here. That's the great part of it. This thing works just as well as a rabbeting plane or a shoulder plane as it does as a block plane. Now, they're a little more unusual, a little more expensive, but you know what? It's a pretty cool tool. So if you're thinking of getting a 2-for, this is a great place to go, or if not, the shoulder planes are actually pretty affordable and all over the place as well. The last of the 4 planes that I recommend every shop has is the jointer plane. Now, here's one sitting here, and let's just review a little bit. Block plane, jointer plane. I think you get the idea. There's a little bit of a difference in size. Now, this is not an inexpensive tool, so if you don't need it, don't buy it, okay? But if you're going to work with hand tools, this is a great one to have. Honestly, if you've got a good joiner that's set up for making cuts, power joiner, then more likely than not, this is going to be a tool that doesn't need to be in your shop, but it's really nice to have sometimes, okay? Working with long boards, probably not popular like this one, but say it's walnut. You're making a dining table, and you've got boards that you've run over your joiner to get a nice joint to fit those boards together to make your tabletop. Now, that's all fine and good, but sometimes something goes wrong when you're running it through the joiner. You lift it a little bit someplace. You've got a high spot there, and the joint doesn't come together perfectly. That's what the joiner plane is all about. When we're looking at fitting things together, straight is what we want. Straight edge. This is what we're trying to do, and that's why the joiner plane is a great tool, because it's nice and long and it is flat, okay? That's where we're going with this. We want to be able to fit that thing perfectly together. As with jack planes, you've got a number of different sizes that technically fit into the joiner plane category. They can go from 20 to 24 inches long, and the widths will change too. So you're going to find a few different things that'll fit in that joiner plane world for you. This is the joiner plane. It's a whole lot set up like the jack plane. You've got your cap iron, releases, comes loose. Again, we've got a plane iron and the plane itself, okay? In this case, the bevel is down. That's not that weird, okay? Sometimes they fit that way perfectly and drops right into the mouth the way it's supposed to. Again, we have the lateral adjustment, just like we do with the other planes. And show it to you this way. Oh, I'm running out of camera. Okay, but that sets it up fine. Put the cap back on. Screw that down nice and tight. And then check your mouth. We want to get a little bit of lash there. Just a little bit of touch. You're good. Now, while we're playing here, and because this is such a big plane, this is something that's kind of a good thing to know about planes too. You've got friction going on when the metal touches the surface of the wood. Sometimes that doesn't make it move very easily, okay? That's when something comes into play. Well, you can do it a couple of different ways. I like a block of paraffin, and you can tell this one's been used quite a bit. Take a block of paraffin and just give a little bit of mark here across the sole of the plane. And that's going to give you just a little bit of skate as you go along the edge of the wood. It makes it move a little easier, takes some of that weight off of it so that you don't have to fuss with it and fight with it quite that bad. So a little bit of paraffin in your apron, you're good to go. Now, you'll remember, we want to keep this as flat as we can on the surface without rocking. That's the tricky part, because there's a lot of metal here and it wants to roll, okay? So this is going to take some practice to get used to. Now you want to come over to the piece, and if you know you've got a high spot, you've probably got that marked. Because we have a nice flat sole here, we're going to be able to find that high spot, and you'll probably be able to feel it rock front to back if you've got a high spot. Then you notice center right there. Hit on that spot just exactly. Maybe you're not taking enough, so use your lash there. Extend that blade just a little bit. A little more. And there you go. You're taking a nice wisp, and that's all you really want, because that flat of the blade, and I'm barely pushing. Oh, and you can tell that paraffin's working too. Now you can give it a little more. And again, don't do this, okay? Nice and flat. Nice, even, long strokes. And any inconsistencies will disappear in fine wisps. That's the beauty of a joiner plane, and a reason to have one, okay? Terrific tool. It may not be the perfect one you need first, but definitely belongs in the set. So these are the 4 hand planes that I recommend for every shop. Smallest to largest, lots of different planes in between that aren't shown here. Those are for specialty needs, and honestly, one of those may be the perfect one for you instead of a number 5. You may need something else. But find the ones that fit in with you. Get a shoulder plane, block plane, jack plane, joiner plane. Set up your shop, keep them sharp, learn to sharpen them, make sure that they're ready to work when you are. For Wood Magazine, I'm David Thiel. Thanks for watching.